Hello, epistemologists. Today we're talking about the value of knowledge, and I had you read a piece by John Greco, which is on this question. Now, basically, the central problem is we want to know what it is that makes knowledge valuable, maybe over and above the value of mere true belief, or even possibly true belief plus justification, because remember, there are Gettier cases where true belief plus justification doesn't amount to knowledge. And so this question is relevant to whether or not we want to bother solving the Gettier problem, but it's also relevant to whether or not pragmatism can get a leg in and take over as a theory of epistemic justification. So one place to start is with this passage in the Meno. In this dialogue called the Meno, which is by Plato, Meno and Socrates are chatting, and they're trying to ask themselves who they would choose to guide them to this other town named Larissa. So they want to go to Larissa, and they want to know how to pick somebody to guide them to Larissa. Meno has the argument that someone who knows the route is preferable above everybody else. They should find someone who definitively knows how to get to Larissa. But Socrates, being wily as he typically is, suggests that perhaps someone with true opinion will do just as well to get them to Larissa. They don't need to have stable knowledge, they just need to be able to have the right belief about roughly in what direction Larissa is, or roughly where you turn after that rock and things like that. They don't need to have full knowledge of the route, they just need to be able to get them to Larissa. So it prompts the question, is knowledge more valuable than true opinion? Is Socrates right that someone who just has a true opinion about where Larissa is just as good as someone who knows where Larissa is? And John Greco will defend a view which we can describe as a view that knowledge is a kind of achievement. It's a kind of cognitive achievement. And being an achievement, it's got value in and of itself. And this is what explains how it has value over and above all of these other epistemic concepts that we might have that are related to knowledge. Before we get into Greco's particular view, it might be worth laying out what the options are for why knowledge is valuable. One thing you could say is that knowledge has practical value. It allows us to do things. We want knowledge because it's useful. So, suppose that I would like to solve this health crisis. Well, knowledge is sure helpful for solving this health crisis. Without any knowledge, you would never do it, except by sheer fluke. But even then, that seems really unlikely. So you want to build knowledge. It has practical value. And now almost everybody agrees that a lot of knowledge has practical value. But the question is the value of knowledge limited to its practical value? The other point that's important to note about this option, that knowledge has practical value, is that it's possible, right, that true opinion or true belief also has practical value. But it might be the case that knowledge has more value, more practical value than true opinion. Maybe because of its stability, because knowledge indicates grasping with justification, and the justification means that you are more well attuned to what's true or something. Maybe knowledge is the kind of thing that is more practical to have than true opinion, because you can kind of use it in more scenarios. It's more reliable across various changes in the environment or something like that. So it has more actual exchange value, if you will. So that's the view that knowledge has practical value. That's one option that's on the table. And you can see how already, if knowledge were to have just practical value, then the pragmatist has no trouble getting in the door, right? Because the pragmatist is just saying that sometimes pragmatic values can influence whether or not you're allowed to believe. And if knowledge itself has just practical value, the pragmatist has no trouble. You can compare the value of knowledge with the value of other practical things, and you're home free for the pragmatist. So a second theory of why knowledge is valuable that would make more resistance to the pragmatist view is the view that knowledge has intrinsic value. Knowledge is a good in itself. It's something that you pursue for itself, doesn't need any exterior justification. knowledge is one of those things that you want. Suppose that you think pleasure is one of those things that you want in and of itself. You pursue other things because ultimately you want pleasure. Like maybe you work hard at work to get some money because it reduces your suffering, or maybe because it allows you to buy things that make you feel pleasure, right? So pleasure is the end goal. It's the thing that you're seeking other things on behalf of. That's one theory. So knowledge is that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that we pursue other activities in order to get it. And that might seem like a plausible view about what the value of knowledge is, right? Because we structure entire institutions around helping us achieve knowledge, educational institutions, and even non-educational institutions. Sometimes family and home environments are structured around the production of knowledge and teaching kids facts that they might not know before, right? Learning language is in a way gaining knowledge. So on the view that knowledge is intrinsically valuable, you could explain this in many different ways. The way that John Greco will choose to describe this intrinsic value is to say that it's a kind of achievement or success due to an ability that you have. So you could have the ability without the achievement, and the achievement without the ability, but if you have both, it's sort of like extra good, like imagine a runner who, obviously has excellent running ability, but winning the contest, that's an achievement. And so if they've got the running ability and they win the contest, wow, that's like super cool. And you might think that's what the runner is working for.
Set.
There's the start, and Bolt got a good one, and Gay's right with him, and so's Asafa Powell. Bailey's there too. But here's Bolt. Bolt charging to the front. Gay's coming, but can't catch him. Usain Bolt, look at the time, 9:58, world record.
That's what all the training is about. They want to be able to be the top in their competitive field. And so if they work really hard and come in first place, that's something that they would value for itself, not just because it brings them fame or money or things like that. You might note, like, although some athletes make good money being athletes, a lot of athletes don't. So probably they're doing it for the love of the achievement. So those are kind of the two rival views on the table. Either knowledge has practical value or knowledge has intrinsic value. There's a third view available, which is not a view that we would at first like at all, which is the view that knowledge has negligible value. Knowledge is just not valuable over and above true opinion, or they have the same value. This is kind of the view that Socrates is pushing in the Amino that is interesting to explore because it would be a kind of skeptical view about the value of knowledge. Sometimes this view that knowledge has negligible value over and above true opinion is accompanied by a substitution of a different epistemic good as something that has value over and above true opinion. For example, some people think that understanding, the state of understanding something, has more value than knowledge or true opinion. So true opinion and knowledge maybe are equally valuable to each other, but understanding, that's more valuable than either of those. So you could have the view that knowledge is negligibly valuable, but think that there's these other epistemic goods like understanding or maybe wisdom or something like that, that have more value over and above these other things. So why would you have that view? Lots of reasons. Some of it depends on your total epistemic methodological theory, right? Your epistemological views might say or recommend that the true achievement that you're seeking isn't just knowledge. Like maybe knowledge is cheap and lots of people can have it. Maybe what you want is understanding, which requires more work, or it requires a deeper grasping or something. And that deeper grasping is the thing that you're after. For example, maybe you don't want to just know that the Big Bang occurred and created the universe or something like that. Maybe you want to understand how the Big Bang was possible, how the physics of the Big Bang works. Understanding is kind of a deeper epistemic state. Now, the last thing I'll say is that you could have the view that knowledge also has intrinsic value and that understanding has intrinsic value, but maybe think that understanding has greater intrinsic value or something like that than knowledge. That might be a view you could have. Or maybe you could think that knowledge has practical value, but understanding has value in itself. Or maybe you could think that knowledge has intrinsic value, but understanding has practical value. I don't know. Basically, any mix of views is possible. For now, we'll be zeroing in on the way that these different attitudes about value have to do with knowledge specifically, not necessarily all of these epistemic goods. But in class, I will want to hear from you your thoughts about these different epistemic goods. Can you make a list of things that are epistemically good besides true opinion and knowledge and understanding? And are they comparable? Are some of them more valuable to you? That's something to think about as we get ready for class. So let's examine Greco's view for a second. Greco thinks that knowledge is a kind of achievement or success due to ability. And there's this problem for Greco that Pritchard finds. Pritchard in a 2008 and 2009 piece. Pritchard says, quote, "One can possess knowledge without exhibiting a cognitive achievement, and exhibit a cognitive achievement while lacking knowledge." How do you show this? And why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because if you can possess knowledge without exhibiting a cognitive achievement and exhibit a cognitive achievement while lacking knowledge, then it isn't the case that knowledge is an achievement, right? Because the concepts come apart. So how does he show this? He shows this by example. Here's our first example of achievement without knowledge in this case where Pritchard thinks you have an achievement, but you don't have knowledge. In the barn country case, so driving around, maybe the Hudson Valley, full of barns. Wow, that's a barn, that's a barn, that's a barn. But it turns out like half of them or more than half of them are movie set barns. They're just barns facades, they're not real barns. So in that case, Barney can use his cognitive abilities to pick out a single barn successfully, Pritchard says, even though he has no knowledge, because unbeknownst to him, all of the other barns are just facades. So Pritchard thinks that in the barn country case, Barney, which is the name of our subject, has cognitive abilities that enable him to get that one true belief, but he doesn't have knowledge, right? Because it's a Gettier case. Here's the second example that Pritchard brings up. It's the example of knowledge without achievement. And this case that we discuss is the case of past testimony. So in this case, there's this person named Morris, and Morris is able to learn from someone where the Sears Tower is by asking, hey, where's the Sears Tower? And he learns where the Sears Tower is by testimony, even though the cognitive achievement isn't his, says Pritchard. It's the resident's cognitive achievement. So Pritchard didn't achieve anything cognitively when he learns where the Sears Tower is because somebody on the street tells him. The cognitive achievement belongs to the person who was able to tell him where Sears Tower is. Morris, in a sense, can just like write it down in his notebook and then look it up on Google Maps. Like, he doesn't need to have any abilities beyond the ability to understand words and then follow directions from his phone, right? He doesn't need to have an ability, but Pritchard thinks that's a case in which he has knowledge because, of course, you can get knowledge through testimony. So these two examples show that, on the one hand, achievement comes apart from knowledge and that knowledge comes apart from achievement. So Greco's in trouble, it looks like, because Greco thinks that knowledge is constituted by this kind of achievement, and if Pritchard is right and knowledge and achievement come apart, then his analysis won't work. Now, what is Greco's response to these problems? Greco prefers to say, first of all, that we can sometimes take credit for an achievement that we've gained in cooperation with others. So in the second case, in the past testimony case where Morris is learning about where the Sears Tower is, he thinks that that's still an achievement for Morris to learn where the Sears Tower is. It does depend on his cognitive abilities. And he thinks that that's not a case where the achievement that Morris gets is swamped out by the achievement of the resident who's telling him where the Sears Tower is. maybe here's an analogy that would help us understand this point and help you think about whether you agree with Greco. Suppose that you're playing a game of soccer, and in soccer there's a lot of passing of the ball that's necessary to try to get it into the goal, right? Now suppose that the team has worked really hard, the midfielders have gotten it to the offensive side, and the offensive side is kicking it toward the net, and now at the last minute they pass it to one of the players who's been kind of on the sidelines, not really doing a lot of the passing work, not really dodging anybody, but they pass it and he has an opportunity to kick the ball into the goal. It's like right there, he's right next to the net, nobody's defending it, it's not offsides because like there's another defending player kind of a little past him. So all he does is he just taps the ball into the goal. And they get a goal, and like everybody celebrates, and it's great. The soccer player is in a great mood. But let's suppose that it was a minimal effort that this kicker had to do to get the ball into the goal. Greco's analysis suggests that that person who tapped the ball into the goal should still get credit for their achievement, even though they could only have done it in cooperation with a bunch of other members of the team. He thinks that doesn't lessen its status as an achievement, nor does it lessen the status of the achievement accruing to that particular individual who accomplished the achievement, right? Because there's all sorts of things that go into making sure that that ball goes into the goal, even if it's a little bit of a tap. You've got to be attentive, you've got to be in the right place at the right time, which often takes a lot of work. You've got to recognize your opportunity when you see it, and you have to act quickly. All these things, right, are required to successfully put the ball in the goal, even if it seems like the easiest last motion of the leg. All of the stuff that comes up to that point still counts. And you might think that in the Morris case, something similar is going on. Like Morris has to understand language. He's got to understand how streets are related to each other. He's got to be able to ask somebody where the Sears Tower is. If they tell him where the Sears Tower is, maybe he has to be ready to write it down just to make sure he doesn't get lost. Maybe he's prepared with like a GPS on his phone. He knows where to find Google Maps. And so like when somebody gives him the piece of testimony, he can fill out all the other stuff that he needs in order to get to Sears Tower. And that's already something sophisticated that, you know, a 2-year-old couldn't necessarily do. And so Morris has an achievement, even though he had to work less hard for it than if he had been a resident and like just passed the Sears Tower every day, and that's how he learned where the Sears Tower was or something. You might think it's an equal amount of work, or even if it's less work, it's still valuable as a piece of knowledge and as an achievement. That's what Greco wants to say. Now, the second thing that Greco wants to say is that sometimes a person doesn't really have the ability to distinguish things in the same way in weird cases, like in the barn country case. So Greco wants to say that ability is relative to environment. So in the barn country case, Barney doesn't really have the ability, after all, to distinguish between real barns and fake barns. And even though his perception is still relevantly similar, his lack of ability in this context means that that's what explains that he doesn't have knowledge. If he did have the ability, then he would have had knowledge. And Greco's view is that they do come together. You only get knowledge when you have this achievement due to an ability. And in the barn country case, the ability is blocked. And so the achievement is blocked. And so Barney doesn't have knowledge after all. And that's his response to these two cases. Greco thinks that his account can best explain why knowledge has intrinsic value, because kind of epistemically, everything is working toward this achievement, right? Your abilities, your cognitive abilities, like your ability to form beliefs, your ability to assess evidence, your ability to introspect, all that stuff might be helpful for helping you get knowledge. Your perception will be helpful for getting you knowledge. All of these are abilities that you have, but the knowledge itself is the end goal. It's the achievement. It's the thing that happens once everything's working well together. And then you get this thing, it's like a little trophy.
Warner, do you remember when we spent those 4 amazing hours in the hot tub after winter formal?
Yeah, no.
This is so much better than that!
Every time that you successfully get your true belief and your justification, if it's not a Gettier case, right, then you get your little trophy, your knowledge. And that's a good in itself for Greco. Next time, we'll talk about a view called virtue epistemology, of which Greco is a proponent. According to virtue epistemology, which is a kind of reliabilism at the end of the day, according to virtue epistemology, epistemic agents can be assessed for their knowledge building practices. And this sort of epistemic system, this epistemological system, allows us to evaluate agents for how well they're doing with respect to this goal of like trying to achieve knowledge. And it's sort of a different take on reliabilism than some other views. So we'll be looking into the details of that view for next time. For now, I really just want to focus on the problem of what kind of value knowledge has, whether you agree with Greco's analysis, whether you think that maybe, because this is something we didn't talk about in detail, maybe this achievement isn't intrinsically valuable in your view. Maybe it's only valuable for practical reasons. Do you think that knowledge has mere practical value? And a related question, do you think you can come up with an example that will help show us or demonstrate why it is that sometimes, or when it is that sometimes we value knowledge for itself, even if it's actually not practical? Can you think of an example of that, basically? And if you can, maybe that's further reason to think that knowledge has intrinsic value. But that's something we have to hash out. So thank you so much. I'll see you very soon. Bye.